Nearly 20 years ago, Jim Caviezel starred in one of the most controversial movies of all time, that also became one of the most successful movies of all time, The Passion of the Christ. Throughout the years, Jim Caviezel's leading man status never really took off as he faded out of the public spotlight. But this man who played Jesus would re-emerge as the star of new Christian-based films, like Paul, Apostle of Christ, and Infidel. Caviezel had begun to embrace his deep-rooted Christian values in his professional life, and to many, became known more for his strong beliefs than his films. Those beliefs would soon become increasingly more controversial and scandalous in the headlines. Mr. Jim Caviezel became very outspoken on topics ranging from COVID-19 to the 2020 election to even QAnon-related conspiracy theories, such as adrenochrome, which involves the alleged blood harvesting of children. Those views and theories that Jim Caviezel believes so passionately have turned his latest film, Sound of Freedom, into not just an unexpected massive hit, but also the most recent inductee into the controversial Movie Hall of Fame, much like The Passion of the Christ. So, as we try to launch a new series where we delve into some of the most controversial and scandalous events in movie history, we thought, why not start with one that is currently dominating the headlines, as we find out just why this film, Sound of Freedom, is so controversial. And you would think that the subject of child sex trafficking would be enough, but pretty much everything about, around, and adjacent to this film has generated controversy, bringing out the best and the worst of the political right and left. Because it seems like that's what happens nowadays with everything.
When God tells you what to do, you cannot hesitate.
Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel. To understand a film that preaches the significance of being against human trafficking, we must first understand who the film is about, and that is a man named Tim Ballard. In 2013, Ballard founded the non-profit organization Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, which is an anti-sex trafficking organization that Ballard has said to have rescued thousands of sex trafficking victims. And that is where the controversies begin. According to several reports by Vice, from 2020 through the present, they claim that the stories told by Tim Ballard and the organization aren't necessarily truthful. Tim Ballard has refuted those claims Vice made by saying that many facts were left out of their report. There have been many disagreements on how the organization is operated, but the facts remain. Tim Ballard has rescued children from the sex trafficking world, but the actual numbers are up for debate. But even saving one child is pretty dang impressive. Despite being a massive hit in the year 2023, Sound of Freedom started its journey all the way back in 2015, when Tim Ballard wanted a movie made about his organization's exploits. It would be another 2 years when director Alejandro Monteverde would see a story on an evening news show about child trafficking that would prompt him and co-writer Rod Barr to write a fictionalized script titled The Model. Director Monteverde would meet a producer who would ask if he had ever heard of Tim Ballard. After Googling him really quick and being impressed with the stories he read online, he asked to meet with the man and realized that his quote-unquote real life far surpassed the fiction that he had written in his script. So they went off and rewrote their script based off of one of Tim Ballard's missions to Colombia.
Tim Ballard has one mission: to track down child traffickers.
It was Tim Ballard himself who requested Jim Caviezel to portray him in the film, after being very impressed with his performance in The Count of Monte Cristo. Once the script was right, and the financing was in place from several sources including Tony Robbins, the film would go before cameras in 2018. But since the film's release, however, the controversies have not stopped. On July 18, 2023, Tim Ballard left Operation Underground Railroad after an internal investigation into claims made against him by multiple employees. According to their sources, a complaint was filed against Ballard after an overseas trip, and that a subsequent investigation led Tim Ballard to resign from the organization he founded. Since Tim Ballard resigned under what could only be described as very curious circumstances, he has gone on to co-found a new organization called Spear Fund. Tim Ballard would then go on his Instagram page to tell people to expect more lies about him by the quote-unquote godless leftist media, who he believes are attacking him in an attempt to help human traffickers. Disney and Angel Studios. Once the independently financed film was finished shooting, it came time to find a way to get it out to the masses. The producers had actually set up a solid distribution plan with the major studio 20th Century Fox, yet at the time Fox was being purchased by Disney, and in 2019, when the sale was complete, Disney completely shelved Sound of Freedom. Tim Ballard and the CEO of Angel Studios claim that Disney knew of the film, but tried to block its release, with what some believe was a not-so-subtle way of implying that the studio was protecting child sex traffickers. Yet Disney claims that they simply had no idea the film even existed, nor that they owned it. From there, Angel Studios would launch a crowdfunding effort in an attempt to purchase the rights to the film from Disney, which they did. Once the Christian faith-based studio owned the film, they began a marketing campaign to make sure the film could reach the widest audience possible. This included adding a tag at the end of the film where star Jim Caviezel comes on to say the film's tagline, "God's children are not for sale," while explaining that the only way to market the film without big studio money was to pay it forward and purchase tickets for the film so that other people can see the movie, and that the most powerful type of person is a storyteller.
And you can send the message that God's children are no longer for sale.
Box office. After years of sitting on the shelf, the film was ready to hit screens across the country. Angel Studios would pick the prime July 4th weekend slot to release the film. I'm assuming they did that because America. Sound of Freedom was set to open against another film about a man who has rescued children from slavery, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This major studio tentpole franchise flick was supposed to crush this little Christian indie. But no, Sound of Freedom beat Dial of Destiny at the box office, eventually becoming the #1 film in America. This film, Sound of Freedom, was heavily marketed to the faith-based community, with controversial figures like Mel Gibson and former President Donald Trump even giving the movie a plug and screening the film amongst a crowd of conservative talking heads and personalities. The marketing worked wonders as the film opened with a solid $14.2 million and a 4th place finish. But what happened after was far more impressive. The film just kept gaining and gaining. Its second week of release would see a 19.6 million take, while word of mouth propelled the film to finish its 3rd week with a 2nd place finish and 27.2 million in box office receipts. Shocking many, as that number wasn't much lower than Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1's opening weekend take. Sound of Freedom had not just become a sleeper hit, it had become one of the most profitable box office stories in history. And of course, the more popular the film got, the more controversies and heated conversation arose, with many criticizing it without even watching the film, probably assuming it was on the level of a Kirk Cameron Hallmark Lifetime Christmas special. But no, this film looks professional and beautiful. For some reason, it is rare to see a quote-unquote Christian film with such cinematic artistry. The box office numbers are surprising because we are currently in a time when mega huge tentpole films that are designed by committee to become blockbusters are crashing and burning. So maybe the unexpected success of Sound of Freedom is part due to Hollywood not really understanding what the people want to watch anymore? Maybe? This could be a sign of another independent film boom that happens every so often in this industry. Plus, this could be the beginning of a whole new way of selling tickets. Who knows? It is possible that the success caused confusion, which led to scandal, which leads to anger, which leads to hate, which leads to suffering. So let's try our best not to suffer and just enjoy going to the movies again, without making every little thing a gosh darn cinematic civil war. Maybe. The next box office controversy would surround the quote-unquote pay-it-forward pricing. While no one is actually refuting the amount of money the film has pulled in, many people are questioning how many actual butts are actually in those sold seats. There have been reports of packed theaters, and there have been reports of less than packed theaters, but that may just depend on the region. If it's a red state or a blue state, maybe, I don't know. Many people don't really think this matters. The film has pulled in that money, and whoever paid that money, they paid for a film that they truly believed in. And due to the subject matter, I personally know people who want to support this film but don't actually want to watch it because of the horrific things that are featured and implied in the movie. But the filmmakers stand firm and say that real, normal, everyday people are the ones buying tickets to this movie. We have seen stories before of actors and actresses buying out entire theaters for their films and giving away tickets to audience members, so this pay-it-forward thing, it really is no different.
Our goal is to inspire 2 million people to attend the film's opening weekend, to represent the 2 million trafficked children around the world.
QAnon. Of course, with all of the great stories written about Sound of Freedom's success, just as many are being written about the actual content of the film and its relationship to the extremely controversial QAnon movement that had swept the nation in the past few years with a core belief that a group of Satan-worshipping elites who run a child sex ring are trying to control our politics and media, and everyone from A-list Hollywood actors to politicians to the Vatican are involved. What do you think? Do you believe those things? Comment your comment in the comments. This movie, Sound of Freedom, has been referred to as quote-unquote QAnon adjacent, even though that particular conspiracy theory is never mentioned in the movie, not once. Many people still saw the film as being pro-QAnon due to its lead star Jim Caviezel being a firm believer in those beliefs.
By God we must live, and with the Holy Spirit as your shield and Christ as your sword, may you join Saint Michael and all the angels in defending God and sending Lucifer and his henchmen straight right back to hell where they belong.
With many news outlets even claiming that Tim Ballard also subscribes to the QAnon mindset. Ballard has explained the confusion by saying that he does not follow nor understand what QAnon even is. He traces his misunderstood Q connection to when he went on a rescue mission in Africa and witnessed some, quote, witch doctor rituals that involved the blood of children. So yeah, messed up stuff does happen in our world. Does that mean it's related to QAnon? Absolutely not. This QAnon confusion is extremely unfortunate. QAnon beliefs are pretty wild and cover a wide range of hard-to-believe topics. One of those involves child trafficking. But does that mean that child trafficking is not real? Absolutely not. So when there is actually a real story on child sex trafficking, the QAnon brand often wrongfully gets attached, thus further diluting the truth. True story. The next controversy for the film is that some claim that it simply isn't a realistic portrayal of child sex trafficking. It plays off of alleged sensationalized stories told by Tim Ballard and his organization Operation Underground Railroad, although that organization is never mentioned in the film. The story simply follows Tim Ballard as he travels to break up a sex trafficking ring in Colombia. And even Operation Underground Railroad has even said on their own website that, quote, while this type of human trafficking exists, it simply isn't the majority. Most trafficking happens through a manipulative grooming process. So to play devil's advocate here, a movie is meant to be entertaining to watch, no matter the subject matter, so you cannot really fault the filmmakers for choosing a story that focuses on telling a more thrilling, action-packed narrative. Despite all the controversies in the lead up to the film's release, and the actual film, which most critics agree isn't actually all that controversial in its content, the film, Sound of Freedom, is a grounded thriller that sometimes disguises itself as an action movie. But at its core, Sound of Freedom is a heartbreaking, character-driven drama. It goes to darker places than I expected, but it never crosses the line on what the camera shows. It lets your imagination and your nightmares do that for you. The story slowly evolves into a man-on-a-mission heist movie, resulting in a suspenseful undercover rescue of many children. And for the most part, that mission was true. The third act, however, results in a mostly fictional Rambo-esque escape. It's well shot and edited, but it is an example of extreme dramatization for movie-making purposes. Yes, the final action sequence is exciting, but has unfortunately brought more scandal onto this film that claims to be based on a true story. It never actually claimed to be a true story. Based on a true story is a very different thing, and all movies do it. Maybe all of this would be forgiven if the main character was just inspired by Tim Ballard and was given a different name. A Tim Ballard-like man goes on a Tim Ballard-like mission, you know. But no, the filmmakers decided to mix fact with fiction to tell a story to get a message out there, and like I said, all filmmakers do that. Even Angel Studios has an entire page on their website openly explaining what characters and plot points are real and what has been fabricated for cinema.
The part of Sound of Freedom that reminds me most of Operation Triple Take was the beach scene, the beach rescue. That is how it looked. That is how it was all set up.
The critics. At this point, more and more reviews began popping up online, even though at first the majority of film critics were ignoring Sound of Freedom. In fact, JoBlo.com is one of the first non-political, non-religious organizations that actually reviewed it. When it was first released, reviews skewed positive because mostly Christian-based websites were the ones posting reviews about it. And as the film is from a Christian-based production company and tells a Christian-based story, those reviews were always bound to lean a little more positive. But when the film became the milestone it has become, those film critics could not ignore it anymore, and more reviews began popping up that weren't as favorable. This would lead to the next controversy the film saw, as Tim Ballard would be interviewed on TV and claim that the bad reviews were put forth by reviewers who were trying to normalize sexual activity with children, and that pedophiles were salivating at any review that was less than positive for the film. Co-founder of Angel Studios, Neil Harmon, even asserts that some of the criticism for the film is coming from people who benefit from child exploitation. What do you think?
These are the conversations they don't want to have, and they have to discredit Sound of Freedom because they know the Sound of Freedom is going to shine a light on this darkness, and we're not going to stop. We will shove this conversation down their throats to protect children.
theater sabotage. Many have reported, quote, strange occurrences at theatrical screenings of Sound of Freedom, such as fire alarms being pulled, horrible odd odors, the air conditioning suddenly failing, turning the lights on, water pressure issues, the theater not being able to download the movie file to play, or the film being completely deleted. And more craziness. But is this just happening to Sound of Freedom? Or do movie theaters just suck now? We have all had unpleasant experiences at the theater, but is this happening more than usual, specifically to Sound of Freedom screenings? These technical difficulties are easier to report now due to social media, so maybe it feels like there's more of them, but we cannot deny that these interruptions have only fueled the fire to the conspiracy theory that some people are trying to shut this movie down. The theater sabotage stories became so popular that Angel Studios was basically forced to address the scandal. The studio went on to point out that many reports have come from AMC Theaters, which is a company they claim has gone above and beyond to support this film, with additional screenings and promotions. This makes it difficult to believe that AMC Theaters is trying to take this film down. If anything, it's an angry projectionist working alone, or theaters just suck now. The Kidnapping Crowdfunder. Another controversy and scandal that has recently popped up is one that bears mentioning but can't really be attributed to the film per se, but many in the media sure did try. As you know, Angel Studios enlisted crowdfunding in order to purchase the film rights from Disney. In doing so, they received investments from 6,678 people. When it comes to crowdfunding, anyone can give money. There is no background check. Well, on July 23rd, 2023, one of those backers was arrested for accessory to what was originally reported as child kidnapping. All of those Sound of Freedom haters instantly jumped on this new scandal, wrongfully labeling the man a producer of the film even though he only donated like $500. Eventually, it was revealed that this incident was actually a child custody dispute involving one of his tenants of a building he owned. And you know what? Even if this dude was up to no good, it has nothing to do with Sound of Freedom, but unfortunately in today's political climate, when it comes to social media, misleading headlines rule supreme. And we are all guilty of that misinformation sin. So even though that particular controversy may not specifically be related to the actual movie, it is part of an unusual pattern of news, both real and fake, that have dominated the headlines since Sound of Freedom became a massive hit. Whether it's an organization founded by a man with credentials that many question, a ticket-selling campaign, with many questioning the validity of those ticket sales, a main star who has taken to promoting conspiracy theories, and backers of the film being embroiled in their own illegal activities. The headlines about the movie have become a bigger story than the actual movie.
I'll stick to Barbenheimer, thank you very much.
Just a movie? But I guess at the end of the day, Sound of Freedom is a movie. And as a movie, it is designed to do two things: make people talk and make people money. And Sound of Freedom has done both very well. So well that it made more money than the Tom Cruise starring Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 at the domestic box office. And it made Indiana Jones look like a flop. As the saying goes, there is no such thing as bad press. And the fact that people can't stop talking about this movie proves that this movie succeeded at getting its message out there. A message that should not be controversial and scandalous. But that itself is a controversial scandal. Sometimes a movie is just a movie, 2 hours of shut-your-brain-off entertainment. But sometimes, a movie can do so much more. Sometimes a movie comes along and shines a light on a topic that many of us have turned a blind eye to. There's even a scene in Sound of Freedom where Tim Ballard, played by Jim Caviezel, says that it's not polite conversation to talk about child sex trafficking. And you know what? Yeah, it's horrible and uncomfortable. But you know what? You can talk about a movie. And the people, they're talking.
Sound of Freedom's good. Yeah, Sound of Freedom's definitely really good. You guys should watch that, especially you guys with kids.
Epilogue. The thing about Sound of Freedom is that the movie itself is not controversial. It's a pretty straightforward story of a man who fought hard to get justice for trafficked children. Does the movie take liberties with the truth? Yeah, I'm sure it does. It's not a documentary. Just like every other movie out there that is, quote, based on a true story. The controversies for the film stem from the personal beliefs of some of the people involved. But honestly, if we stopped watching movies just because we disagree with everybody who worked on a movie, then none of us would ever watch another movie again. But ask yourself, why this film? Why this topic? Why was there a scandal to begin with? It makes you think, thus making everything even more scandalous.
Wherever I go, I find my way home.
During a beautiful scene in Sound of Freedom, the audience discovers that the literal sound of freedom is the sound of children playing and laughing, which can be heard after their rescue. But the question is, what sound did this film make? Was it a sound of freedom? A sound of awareness? A sound of success? A sound of cinema? A sound of controversy? A sound of scandal? I guess that all depends on who's listening. What do you hear?